Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you case number 164 in the best way to do cataract surgery series. This is a fairly soft lens, a 1+ dense lens, and as well as small pupil. And this patient also has IFIS. And so I'm going to show and illustrate, hopefully, and prove to you why double chop and cross chop and mechanical fracturing techniques and principles worked so well with the IFIS situation. You're going to see that case here. So this is the patient's eye. I'm using a cotton tip to steady the eye and using a corneal marker, which will help me to center and size a rhexis. This is my paracentesis incision, first on the right side and then the left side, making sure I'm flat to iris plane, which creates a nice corneal shelf, which will then allow me to achieve a self-sealing incision. I always use that cotton tip to steady the eye. This is intracameral lidocaine, and then some intracameral epinephrine. You can see some billowing of the iris. And then some dispersive viscoelastic to coat the corneal endothelium, but also viscodilating the pupil here, as you can see. Using the cannula to hold the eye, the same cannula. This is a triplanar corneal incision. I make a vertical groove, place the blade into the deep part of the groove, tunnel through the cornea, turn the eye toward me, and then I enter. It gives me great control using the same cannula, using minimal instruments whenever possible. And these are the sharp tip Haldane-Perkar forceps that go in sideways and then straighten out. I'm going to puncture the center, pull down towards me, sweep to the right side to create a tear and a little bit of a flap. Grabbing it with the forceps, you can see the gripping part on the forceps teeth is really very nice. It's a great platform. And then I'm able to go around circumferentially. Again, here, the rhexis size as well as the corneal mark size are fairly similar because of the small pupil. We'll go ahead and finish the rhexis. And this is a Capsulorhexis hydrodissection technique. I place a cannula under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, point the tip down, get a nice wave, decompress on the left side, hooking the peripheral lens on the right, and the lens begins to spin. Very efficient, no-nonsense hydrodissection technique. Irrigating the surface of the eye, adjusting the sleeve here. Lifting the incision with the chopper, going in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma. Start to remove the surface epinuclear material, which creates a little bit of a little dip there. So I go underneath the rhexis edge contra-incisionally, point the finger tip vertically sub-incisionally, bringing the instruments together, cutting through the lens material and bisecting the lens. That is double chop, placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, pulling it centrally toward the finger tip, crushing the lens against the finger tip, and that is cross chop. Lifting that first quadrant up with some vacuum and then the chopper, and then crushing it into smaller pieces. Getting the chopper around the second quadrant and pulling it centrally toward the finger tip, performing another cross chop maneuver, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Very carefully. Now I'm going to show that maneuver in slow motion. I, again, pronate my hand, sliding the chopper tip under the rhexis edge contra-incisionally. I'm in the lens equator, pointing the finger tip vertically sub-incisionally. Because the lens is so soft, it cheese wires and cuts through the lens. You can see there's no weird movements, no pressures. It just cuts through the lens like cheese wire. Very safe, very controlled, and it bisects the lens. I place the chopper under the rhexis edge around the right heminucleus, pulling it centrally toward the finger tip and fracturing that right heminucleus in half. Again, I'm making sure I push down on the epinuclear material, which makes sure that I'm away and underneath the anterior capsule. You see that I use the chopper to push the pupil edge away as I approach the lens material with the finger tip. So you want to use the chopper to shield yourself from the pupillary edge, as you saw there. I'm placing the chopper under the rhexis edge again, sideways. I'm pulling the chopper sideways underneath the rhexis edge, underneath the lens equator, around the lens equator, around that second quadrant, and then pulling it centrally toward the finger tip and basically bisecting that fragment in half. Again, because this is soft, the lens pieces are coming out pretty easily here. I'm positioning and repositioning that lens piece with the chopper. And again, with the soft lenses as well as the IFIS cases, you want to just keep the phaco tip in the middle. You don't want to be going after pieces with the phaco tip and potentially removing more viscoelastic. So that's the key. Double chop, cross chop, mechanical fracturing. You can see I'm turned the second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper under the rexus edge, fracturing the lens in half, and performing the same maneuvers, sliding the chopper again under the lens. The key is I'm able to use the chopper to get around the lens equator. Then I'm able to crush the lens with opposing forces on either side. Very controlled, very easy, using mechanical forces to do this. So let me explain this real quick. It's not rocket science. So what do most people do when they go after pieces? They use a phaco tip. If you go after lens pieces with the phaco tip, what do you need to use? Aspiration vacuum. If you use aspiration and vacuum around the lens pieces as you're trying to grab it into the lens bag, into the periphery, what happens? You're going to remove viscoelastic. If you remove viscoelastic, what happens? Well, the viscoelastic is the thing that was keeping the iris stable and pushed down and away, like pushing sandbags down on something. And so if you remove that, you're releasing the iris so that it can move around with the convection forces from the BSS. And of course, we're putting high infusion pressure into the eye. So you're going to have tremendous billowing. You're going to have tremendous movement of the iris, potentially shrinking of the iris. And so it makes absolutely no sense to go after lens pieces this way. By going after lens pieces this way, you're just setting yourself up for trouble. You're going to grab the iris. You're going to cause iris damage. And you're going to have this tiny little pupil, and then you can't see. You're going to have to do either put in hooks or rings, and then if you put rings too late, you can tear the anterior capsule. It can be one thing after another, bad things happening. If you can't see, for some people, then you have a higher risk for buzzing when you shouldn't, and then you can have posterior capsule rupture. So why do it that way? Keep the phaco tip in the middle. That's the thing that's causing problems. Bring the lens pieces towards the phaco tip with the chopper. When you use double chop and cross chop, remember, I'm not utilizing vacuum or ultrasonic energy. I'm not using any of that suction. When I'm using double chop and cross chop to fracture the lenses, I've never initiate vacuum during those maneuvers. So it's very safe, very well controlled. So I take the chopper out, push BSS in, take the phaco tip out, and I go in with the INA handpiece. I always start subincisionally removing the cortical material from anterior to posterior. And because this pupil is pretty small, you just want to be very careful you don't grab the pupillary edge here, making sure you get underneath the rexus edge when you're initiating that vacuum for the INA. Switch to polish mode, polishing under the rexus edge and then polishing the posterior capsule surface. There's always some fine wispy lens material there. You want to always polish that. Interestingly enough, if you have the eye fully inflated, sometimes by releasing the iris, you can bring the posterior capsule more anterior because there's a little bit of reverse pupillar block. And when you have a reverse pupillar block, the pupil is so far down, it looks like it's clear. But then when you release that reverse pupillar block, you can actually see more of that lens material that's on the surface. So I skip pulsing into the subincisional space with the BSS. I go straight with the cohesive viscoelastic to fill the bag. And then this is a single piece acrylic lens is going into the capsular bag. Again, I'm turning the eye away so I can see the rexus edge on the contralateral side, and I make sure it goes underneath the rexus edge with the lens. I go in with the INA without irrigation, activating irrigation, making sure the haptics come off the optic, and then I quickly go to the Maltzman with my second instrument here once I go with the IA, making sure I have a second instrument just to help me control the situation here, make sure I can see what I'm doing, making sure both haptics are definitely within the bag. You can see I'm able to tilt the lens and then very easily and comfortably tilt it and hold it with the Maltzman, removing all the viscoelastic from within the bag as well, making sure I'm protecting the iris with the Maltzman from the INA tip, retracting the pupillary edge, making sure that both haptics are within the bag here. And then switching to visco mode, removing all the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber, switching to polish mode, polishing underneath the rhexis edge one more time, and then switching to visco mode, removing all the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber, and then I'll hydrate. You see, once I get all that viscoelastic out, look how much billowing there is. That's because I removed all those sandbags at the very end of the case, and that's what you want to do. This situation where you see all the billowing, you should never see that in the middle of your case. If you see that in the middle of your case, that means you're using way too much vacuum and aspiration and you're sucking out all your OVD. And to me, that's a kind of a sign that your technique is not very good, right? If you're removing all that viscoelastic in the middle of all the action of trying to take the lens out and you see all that billowing, then that tells you got to modify your technique. You got to figure out what you're doing wrong because there's no reason for that, as you saw and illustrated very clearly with this case. This patient has IFIS. If I wanted to, this patient's iris would be billowing all over the place. This would be a perfect disaster case that you can see at a meeting where their iris is being eaten up by the phaco tip, iris is prolapsing out of the wound. But I don't have those issues. Why? Because I'm keeping the phaco tip in the central safe zone. I'm bringing the lens pieces to me with the chopper. When I perform double chopper, all of the mechanical fracturing techniques, double chop, cross chop, mechanical fracturing, remember, the phaco tip is not initiating vacuum at all. I'm only irrigating the eye. I'm only in position 1 with continuous infusion, and I'm just crushing the lens mechanically. So that means I can place that chopper and phaco tip any which way I want. I can place the phaco tip close to the iris, in the bag, no matter where I want to do, and I can chop in various different angles. That's the beauty of this technique. Again, people have to understand this is why I'm doing it. It's really not a gimmick. It's not just doing it for different sake, just to say I'm doing it a different way. To me, this really has allowed me to be much more versatile and much more confident when I disassemble lenses. And in particular, for these lenses with IFIS and small pupil, you can have tremendous confidence and efficiently and effectively disassemble the lens in these very floppy iris situations. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.